Good morning, Vietnam! Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Historical Humans Podcast. My name's Justin Woods, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts, Colum Coleman and Aaron Gilpin. And
R.I.P. Robin Williams.
So right here is our little experiment in point of why I should be the one to hire an editor for us.
I am the editing department.
God save us all. Yes. So today, we come to you on our Historical Humans podcast for a rather touchy subject about as close to modern times as we are really going to get here on this show. We're only going back 50 years or so on this one to the Vietnam War. Specifically, we will be discussing the Vietcong, who they were, what they believed, what they did, why it all happened.
Yeah, we don't really talk about that part. We just talk about how America got involved.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of Vietnam is just the quote unquote war on the home front for the United States of America. So we're gonna be doing a little bit of a different perspective than you might have gotten in your just standard history books in high school.
Isn't that the point of the show anyway?
God, this will be fun.
I just want to know why the trees are speaking Vietnamese.
I am the Lord. I speak for the trees. For some fucking reason, they're speaking Vietnamese.
And we'll get into why that's the case here shortly, and that's the beautiful part of this episode. This is going to be Colum's nightmare.
I did not want to do this. They have come with the energy knowing that I am in pain. So for all of you out there who are listening to this, that is why these two are bouncing off the walls. They know I am in pain doing this.
He's in Spain without the
modern times. So
no.
Into definitely not 21st century politics, we swear. We're going to begin with just a little bit of a definition here. So the Viet Cong, as far as the name goes, is a shortening of the term Vietnamese communists. Because, why say things when you can make the pseudo acronym out of them?
Okay, but you could also have quoted your favorite show in why use many word when little word do job.
That is not my favorite show. You just have a pathological hatred of it despite quoting it constantly. But what's interesting about the term Viet Cong is it was originally an insult. The term was coined by South Vietnamese president, and I apologize for trying to say his name here, Ngo Dinh Diem, who used it as a derogatory term for the South Vietnamese people who were rebelling against his rule.
So kind of like how the British tried to call Americans Yankees, and we just kind of just
and we
roll
Yeah,
with
now
it.
we're proud of that. The Yankee Clipper, New York Yankees.
Yankee Doodle Dandy and all that. Yeah, it just straight up is like, we have a name now, guys.
Okay, but Yankee Doodle Dandy was actually a song that they used to make fun of us, and we just commandeered it.
Yeah.
He put a feather on his cap and called it macaroni. He called it high fashion. No.
Yep.
Yeah, they're making fun of us.
Yeah. And we 100%.
Too bad for them, we didn't understand.
And we won.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. It's like, it's one of those things of like, oh my God, guys, we're in the news. You just run with it. They just fed off of that.
Hey, but at least you've heard of me.
And just feed on the legitimacy it gives them. The ironic thing is like because this was a outsider term more or less, with the pro-democracy South Vietnamese president coining it to describe these communist rebels in his territory. It actually kind of gave a bit of a unification point for the various rebelling groups in South Vietnam, because the Viet Cong are actually three disparate organizations that just unite under the name.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. The Vietcong are the first two groups are the Hoa Hao and the Cao Dai. Again, apologies for the pronunciation. These were strongly nationalistic religious sects in South Vietnam. The Hoa Hao were Buddhist and the Cao Dai were Taoist. So they were from different religions.
That's Taoist.
Taoist, thank you.
Sorry,
Again, I step in. You are supposed to do that. You know
I
how
feel
things
bad.
are.
I'm not that person, but yes, yeah. Okay, continue.
Step in when it happens. All right. We do not need another Potawatomi incident. God, I cannot say words. You know this.
Yeah, that was a bad
Read
one.
them in books, and I am not supposed to be speaking them ever. But yeah, these were nationalistic religious movements. And one of the fun things is some of them were actually pretty recent. The Hoa Hao were formed in 1939 and were the first group to begin armed hostilities against the French colonial rule of Vietnam at that time.
good for them.
Yeah, understandable.
Yeah. Basically, this group of Buddhists saw that France wasn't really a nation in Europe anymore, and so took it upon themselves to pick up a bunch of guns and declare independence.
Who's gonna stop them?
I mean, that's
Not
kind of
the
the point.
French.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, Aaron. You discovered revolutionary thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just gotta wait 2 turns to gain enough points to declare yourself.
Just
Yeah.
one more turn. Just one more
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah, you got to wait 10 turns for the cultural bomb to go off, and you decide who you listen to. Baba Yetu, everyone. Baba Yetu. And the third group is the Viet Minh, which joined with the other two in 1954. And the Viet Minh were a China-based Vietnamese nationalist movement. They were the only secular group involved in this. And that is because, well, they are dedicated to the overthrow of French colonial rule in Vietnam. This group was the communists. Hence why they were originally harbored in China in the early 50s. And it is because of the Viet Minh getting more or less in bed with these other two groups that the term Viet Cong is coined, because it's insulting the other two religious sects of saying, you just joined the communists. Those people in Russia who outlawed religion, or at least tried to.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was, you see where it's meant to make a dig at the first two groups. Once you realize what is actually being referred to here, it's just like, didn't really drive them apart though. Just sort of gave them a cool band name so they could all rock and roll together. Yeah. Yeah, that is what it is. The Viet Cong, and this is where we're just going to start throwing names at you that, well, they are probably going to come up later, are just effectively alphabet soup at this point. Because the Viet Cong's purpose, their reason for existing, aside from overthrowing foreign rule in Vietnam, was to serve as the military arm of what was known as the National Liberation Front. The NLF formed in 1960, just 6 years after the Viet Cong were formed out of the Hoa Hao, the Cao Dai, and the Viet Minh. And like the Viet Cong, the NLF sort of coalesced out of several anti-government groups in South Vietnam. Basically, this was sort of the unified banner that all the little mini local rebellions began to agree to fly under. And the NLF here, with the help of the Vietcong, would form the Provisional Revolutionary Government in 1969. And what this government represents with the Viet Cong is the unification of the National Liberation Front with the areas of South Vietnam that the Viet Cong are actually fighting in. Effectively, the Viet Cong don't actually formally join the NLF for 9 years. It's effectively two separate rebellions.
At the same time. But do they fight each other every now at all?
Not particularly. If they did, it would be unrecorded skirmishes. Both sides seem to have seen each other as the useful idiot. The Viet Cong saw in the NLF something that could be easily recognized on a political stage as a legitimate government that could be used to foster allies, get, the fledgling United Nations and other such groups to sort of, hey, there's actually a political movement here. It's not just, angry farmers blowing up houses.
Again.
Yeah. And
which the British are very familiar with.
Yeah. And the NLF saw the Viet Cong as, this attack dog that more or less could be used to strong arm and bully the military forces occupying South Vietnam for the South Vietnamese government, out of Asia. So they both kind of had this mutual coexistence, which is why after 9 years of more or less coexisting, they agree to formally consolidate their territories. It's a pretty messed up relationship that all these different groups have, because they're really only unified by their hatred of the French.
It's very unifying.
Yeah. I mean, even the British, the British could agree with you there.
Yeah, the British
that's
fought.
A terrifying prospects.
Yeah, no, the British saw every single chance to fight the French for 500 years.
The French did the same, though. They were equally antagonistic. That's the only reason they supported the Americans, where they're like, it would piss off the British? Oui. Yes, we'll send you money. Yeah. And our top general, Marquis de Lafayette.
Yeah. Meanwhile, do you mind if we steal a bunch of islands in the Caribbean? No particular reason.
What's a Caribbean?
Yep.
Hey, that's a nice rock of Gibraltar you have there.
Yeah.
Be a shame if something were to happen to it.
Yeah.
Spain, so, watch out. Look out, Spain.
But you should point out, the British and the French have spent centuries taking every opportunity to fight each other. And now that there is a good reason for the British to fight the French, they refuse. It's like, oh, you want to stop being an oppressive colonial power? That's kind of not really something we put a stop to here, fellas.
I mean, you have to also understand and imagine that in the British's mind, should they equally acknowledge it or should they even pay any mind to it, they're almost validating their claims against themselves. So,
yeah.
It's one of those things of someone accuses you of murder, you're not gonna go back and accuse them of it.
Yeah.
But Black Dynamite, we're the ones selling crack.
All right. What's the next? What's the next part of this topic? All right. Yeah. So the Viet Cong, additionally, because they are working sort of alongside but separate from, and then subsequently with the National Liberation Front, have a separate chain of command, which is organized under the Central Office for South Vietnam, which is the American term for the North Vietnamese. Because, fun fact, as much as the Viet Cong were a homegrown rebellion, they were heavily supplied by North Vietnam. And this is where a lot of their organizing principles comes from. This is where a lot of their weapons come from. This is going to be where we see a lot of both really brilliant ideas and horribly stupid strategies come out.
Oh no.
Almost like it was
With this
ambitiously stupid.
Yeah. 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 The reason why the North Vietnamese get called the Central Office for South Vietnam is because they were doing a lot of recruiting on behalf of the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, because Vietnam at this time is split between North and South, Communist North, Republican South, and tensions are very high, and you effectively have agents of one government crossing the border and giving people guns if they promise to go shoot at Americans.
Ooh.
Not a good look, but hey, the Soviet Union's paying for the guns, so what do the North Vietnamese care?
True.
Welcome to welcome to the late 20th century proxy wars. Yeah, they're basically, it's effectively the central office that commands, arms, supplies, recruits for them. It does all the things that a organized armed resistance needs, all from the safety of a territory that technically can't be attacked. Because, if the United States or France or anyone else attempts an incursion into North Vietnam, instead of just simply fighting the Viet Cong in the South, that's technically a declaration of war and an invasion of another nation. Because all the Americans or anyone else really has authorization to do here is put down an insurrection.
Oh, that's easy. Nobody's ever struggled with putting down insurrections.
Yeah.
I'm sure America sure as hell won't have that issue
Yep.
more than once.
Yeah. The Viet Cong are in operation in one form or another from the 1950s to the 1970s. Dates do get a little fuzzy on account of the fact that this was a, militia organization, effectively. Extensive record keeping wasn't really done for so much of this. The average dates are effectively 1954 to 1975, effectively from when the Viet Cong formally unite, the three groups into a single banner until the war finally ends. So, yeah, 21 years. 21 years of warfare. I mean, and if you think about it, technically it's what 36 if you take it from when the Hoa Hao started shooting at people.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
we were only there for 10 of it.
Yeah, it's bad. Yeah. So they're fighting this war against an enemy that really keeps changing for them. First, they're fighting against just the French. Then it's the South Vietnamese. Then it's the United States of America. Just every time things start going their way, somebody else enters into the conflict. And it's almost always against them. So
they just can't catch a break, man.
No, it's fun. And because of this, they employ guerrilla warfare. And what's interesting of this is that the guerrilla tactics, booby traps, hit and run, sabotage, assassination, that doesn't really begin as like a full-fledged strategy, what the Viet Cong become known for. That only begins in December of 1965.
When the U.S. gets involved?
No, because that is when an edict from the North Vietnamese, from the from the Central Office for South Vietnam that is, effectively coordinating everything. They send out this edict that says, we are losing conventional warfare, holding territory, taking towns, fighting man to man. We're losing. The Americans are here. They are infinitely larger than us.
And indiscriminately attacking.
Now, that comes later. Everyone go to ground. The American response to everyone going to ground is, of course, firebomb everything. But, that is another story. The Vietnamese, specifically the Vietcong here, do prove to be quite ingenious with guerrilla warfare. Like, they prove very adept at it. They perfect something which has become very famous. It's a staple of a lot of different war movies, a lot of times because of how deadly and effective it was. It is called the Punji trap, which is a very simple. It's a very simple booby trap. It's just your standard hunting pit where you build a simple fall pit so that a large predator will walk into it and fall down onto, and be trapped in the hole. Except you fill the bottom of the hole with sharpened bamboo sticks so that anything that falls in is horribly impaled.
And to take it even a step worse, they would oftentimes put stuff on the pikes. A lot of times it was human feces because it would be a very quick and easy way for those wounds to get infected should you survive.
Yeah. Yeah, they recognize that, they didn't want to they recognize that odds were they were going to simply impale someone's shoulder or leg, and they really wanted to make sure it killed you.
Yeah, so they would do that, and those traps became one of the worst parts about the whole Vietnamese system because a lot of times these American troops would do long reconnaissance missions where you're walking along these roadways through the brush, through the woods. I mean, I know it's a fictional movie, but Forrest Gump does a really good job of describing a lot of what the warfare looked like for the soldiers on the ground of, all right, we're going to go out looking for Charlie and see if we can find Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Charlie found us.
Yeah.
Never did find Charlie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Things go pretty badly for the people fighting the Viet Cong at about this time. One of the things that that the estimates and other such things come out is that during the period of guerrilla warfare, the Viet Cong inflict an average of 100 casualties per week, which, for a very spread out, very localized entity that they were, very fractured, that's a huge casualty rate to inflict of 100 dead enemies a week from pitfall traps, from sniper positions, from roadside ambushes.
I mean, 100 a week is 5,000 a year. That's a pretty hefty amount just for one form.
Yeah,
Sure,
that's just what they're doing here. The other key thing that also becomes very iconic of the Viet Cong with this guerrilla warfare mandate is the hidden bases that they would operate out of. There was, in researching this, I came across one actually fairly famous example, the base of Chu Chi, which contained over 200 miles of hidden tunnels under the surface.
There's some guesstimates out there, or I shouldn't say guesstimates, some actual estimates that say that there were hundreds of miles, if not thousands of miles worth of tunnels that they used and employed. One, partially because the Vietnamese soldiers were a lot smaller than the Americans were, or like any of their enemies, but also it allowed them to move undetected.
Yeah.
Especially when you have people out doing patrols, trying to look for you, trying to see you. If you can move undetected, there's so much power in that. And what they would do is that hit and run strategy where they would go through the tunnels, pop out, fire at you, hop back in, go to a different outlook, fire again, and they would just continuously pepper and bombard the soldiers to the point where the soldiers didn't know where they were coming from. It does go back to that joke that Aaron made at the beginning of this episode about the trees speaking Vietnamese, because there were a lot of stories that came out from soldiers that said that the trees were speaking, that they could hear voices in the trees, but they could never see anyone. They could never find anyone. And a lot of times the soldiers attributed that to the stress of warfare, but come to find out and come to realize, no, the trees were literally just speaking. They just couldn't see them because they were very cleverly disguised.
Yeah. One of the things too with these tunnels is it granted a lot of the Viet Cong the ability to operate out of occupied towns and villages, effectively meaning that the U.S. garrisoning forces meant nothing. They could appear in the town that the U.S. was fortifying and guarding from attack from outside, because part of their tunnel system ran under the town, and just shoot you in the back.
Yeah, that's not ideal.
Yeah. It's
very brutal.
It takes all the honor out of warfare, because this was not an honorable war from anyone. This was a do anything to survive kind of fight. And I think that's a big part of why it has such a visceral scar on human memory, is because of just how vicious this war had to be.
Well, especially in the United States, it was a massive turning point. I know we're focusing a lot on the Vietcong here specifically, but that ties very much into American public sentiment. The war was so costly. So many people were sending their sons off to war who weren't coming back. Brothers, uncles, it doesn't matter who they were sending off. And it had such a huge cost because the United States, in response to the high costs, ramped up. They began sending more troops. They began drafting. They began calling upon people to serve. And it really escalated. And the more they escalated, the more suffering they had, the more losses that they incurred. And it just kind of became this very repetitive cycle that ended up just burning them in the end. You're burning the candle from both ends when you're just drafting people and sending them into this meat grinder.
Yep. And it's funny you should mention the U.S. Home front, sentimentality there, because that is actually going to be a big part of the next subject in the sort of history of the Viet Cong. Because after about 4 years or so of this guerrilla warfare, an order comes down to change tactics. The Tet Offensive is mandated once again from the North Vietnamese. And what this is from January 31st to February 24th of 1968, the Viet Cong launched their largest frontal assault of the war on U.S. positions. And they will, and it's going to be such a Pyrrhic victory for both sides that effectively both sides lose all popular support. The Americans lose popular support. The Viet Cong lose popular support, just for how vicious this battle is about to be.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. This is absolutely a bloody nightmare.
Can't emphasize enough just how brutal and vicious this warfare was. It left everyone bloody, everyone bruised. It wasn't an isolated incident by any means.
Yeah.
There was no winning, only surviving.
Yeah. Now, the plan of the Tet Offensive here, that is going to mark a major shift away from guerrilla tactics, was to take 85,000 Viet Cong soldiers and march them at 5 major South Vietnamese cities, sack those cities, annihilate its defenders, and occupy enough territory, enough population centers that the South Vietnamese government is forced to capitulate because they effectively no longer have control and are afraid of, getting killed. This massive frontal charge is bolstered by the North Vietnamese. They actually send people in to help in order to ensure that the Viet Cong have sufficiently trained military leadership on the ground and also additional forces. Because the Viet Cong are very good in these small groups by themselves, kind of doing their own harassment thing. But there is concern that in a large formal army, they won't have trigger discipline or any discipline.
I mean, that really becomes a huge issue a lot of times with these revolutionary armies and with these new fighting forces is you're able to unite them behind a cause, but once the cause is kind of said and done, what's left? Like, how are you going to organize? How are things going to work? What's the hierarchy? So it definitely becomes a logistical challenge. And I mean, very recently we saw this with the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. Like, we saw an insurrection force take control and have to establish itself as a legitimate government.
Yeah, I think the most simplest explanation for it is the third King George song from Hamilton, where he rants about how it's much harder to rule than it is to revolt, so good luck now.
I mean,
you'll be back. You will see.
Yeah.
Can't sing anymore due to copyright.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, he's just gonna kick through Aaron's door.
Not again.
It sends the Pinkertons.
Yeah.
Time.
Now, the purpose of this attack was the North Vietnamese were fairly desperate to break a stalemate that had formed in 1967, where, despite everything, neither side could really gain anything. No one could gain ground. It was just a meat grinder. It was just kills. It was just kill counting. And that didn't really work well, because if the success of the revolution stalls, support will fade. So because they are so desperate, they spend a good deal of time planning this, U.S. intelligence knows the Tet Offensive is happening. But being U.S. intelligence, and having apparently learned nothing from the radar reports at Pearl Harbor some 20 years ago, decide that there is no way these Vietnamese can actually organize a significant offensive force.
No. You see, this is the actual logic behind it, is you can't let them know that you know. So you can't defend against their attack, because then they would know you knew. So then they would go for the leak in their intelligence system. So you let it happen, but you know it's going to happen.
Yeah. So,
but if I know that they know that they know that I know that I know, then who's flying the plane?
Yeah.
Nosferatu.
The end net result of this is that the initial attack is so much more intense than the U.S. anticipates that within the first couple days, effectively the time it takes the Viet Cong to walk there, the Viet Cong have seized near absolute control of 36 of the 44 provincial capitals, as well as parts of Saigon, the capital city of South Vietnam.
I was going to say, this coincides almost directly with the fall of Saigon.
Yeah, this is
now Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah,
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, this is effectively going to be about a month of street-to-street fighting in Saigon.
Wow.
It gets pretty bad. The Viet Cong even occupy the fortress of Hue, which is the traditional capital city of Vietnam. This is initially a major boost to them, because here is our ancient pre-colonial capital.
Oh, isn't that where they made their big stand against the Chinese invading army from the 14th, 15th century?
Possibly that does track. I don't actually know that, but that would seem about right because it is a fortress town. Um,
Because
yeah,
that, if that's the case, then that would have been
yeah,
Checks
that
out.
that would have literally been a huge irony, considering they were defending that position and now they're assaulting that position.
yeah. But yeah, they take it, and it's seen as we are the rightful rulers of South Vietnam. We are the Vietnamese people. We have taken the ancient capital. That is ours. That's a big PR thing. Or at least it would have been if, in their efforts to keep a hold of it, they didn't end up leveling most of it.
Ooh.
Um, yeah, the U.S. does a major counterstrike. Most of the cities are liberated within days of the Viet Cong occupation. Uh, Hue holds out until February 24th. And it is a bloodbath. There are heavy casualties for the Viet Cong. Initial estimates place some 60,000 dead from their order. Remember, 85,000 was the initial army that gets bolstered by the North Vietnamese.
Oh, that's right.
Ooh.
So
That's
they are
oh,
they are devastated. Meanwhile, the United States and the South Vietnamese lose only 12,737. So less than a quarter of the casualties that the Viet Cong
It's
suffered.
like a 5 to
it's a
1 ratio.
it's
Yeah,
amazing they ever actually recovered from that fight.
yeah,
Scoreboard. Scoreboard.
yeah, yeah,
Not that episode.
yeah. And because of that, it's a crushing tactical defeat for the Viet Cong, for the North Vietnamese, for everyone on their side. The absolute destruction that the Viet Cong invasion just brings to places like Hue, to Saigon, to all these other towns, villages, and cities of South Vietnam is so absolute that the people of South Vietnam turn on them, and popular support for the Viet Cong evaporates.
Isn't this where
Um,
Radio Asia also comes in too?
I did not see them come up during researching this, possibly.
Oh, I didn't know if
Yeah.
this was that. There's always like some wild stories that come out about. I think it's after the Tet Offensive where they tried to like start playing essentially radio in North Vietnam, to spread propaganda against the Vietnamese. So I didn't. I guess since the Viet Cong were operating out of South Vietnam, I guess they probably wouldn't hear much of it, would they? Unless they're working communications.
Yeah. Although that probably does come up as a result of the Tet Offensive, because we'll get to in a minute, the U.S. employs a strategy called Vietnamization in response to what happens in the Tet Offensive here, which is effectively the practice of effectively uh, replacing putting U.S. soldiers in Vietnam with just arming the South Vietnamese.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, this really
Yeah,
another stalwart of Nixon's legacy that really impacts things long term.
yeah, yeah.
Becomes our
wait,
foreign
really?
policy even to it has shaped our foreign policy even to this day, Aaron.
Yeah, it's bad. But anyway, the big reason before we get to that is, the big reason for the complete psychological turn against the Viet Cong at this time is because the destruction, the actual numbers for it are 7,700 dead civilians, 18,500 injured civilians, and 75,000 homes destroyed.
That's a lot of collateral.
Yeah, all from this assault. And so it is seen as this big tactical victory for the U.S. It's seen as a crushing defeat to the Viet Cong, except for one thing. The Viet Cong increased their standard casualty rate by 5 times during this offensive, meaning they killed 5 times as many soldiers per week during this month than they had for the last 3 years. And that turns the American people against the government, against the war, against continuing this fight, which was already seen as bloody, pointless, and a world away.
And it was very much felt that way because after World War II, America took on the Marshall Doctrine and had shaped their foreign policy to become this world protectorate, this world police. They took their position as a nuclear power and used it to help dictate other nations. And this is where the Cold War really came into a front and really was a fight between two different ideologies. The U.S. backed Southern Vietnam, which was a capitalist society, versus the North Vietnam that was predominantly communist and aligned more with China and with Russia, the United States, as enemies at this time. So they really wanted to step in and become this protectorate, but the American public, they didn't see that aspect of it. All they saw was the human loss, and they didn't see the value in Vietnam, which even to this day, a lot of people in America don't have the best opinions of Southeast Asia. They tend to view it as underdeveloped.
And like when we say the public saw it, I mean, like we mean literally saw it, because this is the first televised war for the U.S. at least.
Yeah, there were communications being sent over. There were videos that were published. There were firsthand accounts, and
this is unfiltered too.
And this also came at a point of mass mobilization of the general public behind a ton of causes. Let's also point out the fact that this was at the peak of the civil rights movement, where a lot of people were fighting for the rights to vote, fighting for the right to, just be human. You had people fighting. There's the hippie movement, the peace and love. Like, there were a lot of public movements that got people behind it. And those two movements alone aligned pretty well with peace and love and no war. Yeah, especially like the Black Panthers, because even in Vietnam, we still sent the black regiments to the front lines at a higher rate than we did white regiments.
Yeah, it was...
Which happens a lot of times in some of the 20th century wars.
It's
Parliamentary fighters got their reputation because they earned it, and also because they were forced there.
It's that's just true of like warfare throughout history. Unfortunately, is you create cohorts of the quote unquote undesirables of your society and throw them into the meat grinder so they die first.
And if they don't, and if they win,
incredibly cruel.
Yeah, and if they won, great. Throw them in the next one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if they don't win, it's a shame. Send them back in a box. If they do win, cool. Off to the next offensive.
Yeah, and with that mentality going on here, this battle, this offensive, is such a Pyrrhic victory for the U.S. because, well, it is tactically everything the U.S. could have finally hoped for after the last 3 years. A major push that turns the opinion of the South Vietnamese people against the Vietcong and results in, 2/3 of their forces being annihilated. It also results in so many dead Americans that the United States public says, screw this.
Yeah, so they began a new policy that what they would do is effectively like a lend-lease. They would send equipment and training, but they would not have boots on the ground, and that was the biggest thing. And that was after Nixon stepped down. That was Ford. What was it? Ford's big thing was no more troops on the ground, no more boots on the ground. Even though I think the war continued, another year or two after the U.S. left?
I'm pretty sure it continued for another 5 years, I think.
Yeah. Okay, it was a little bit longer.
Yeah. Or at least under... Because you also gotta ask, does the part where China invades also still count?
Well,
because they immediately invade right after.
Well,
At least the U.S. after like they actually settled, like um, North Vietnam fully took over, and then
I will say for the purposes of this video, we are tracking it up through 1975 because that is when the Viet Cong as an independent or semi-independent entity effectively ceases to exist.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
so
anyways,
do they
it
like
was.
formally disband?
yeah, we'll actually get to that with the next section here because we're going to jump ahead a few years to um, the peace negotiations of 1971 through 1973, also known as everyone saying I hate you for 2 years. These were not particularly smooth negotiations.
Also love that they held the negotiations in their colonial overlords'
Yeah,
home country and their own stomping grounds. It's like,
I
who
I
knows
I,
Vietnam better? Well, those guys do.
yeah, yeah. The accords are being held in Paris. The capital of the country. The Viet Cong are at least on paper fighting. They're supposed to be rebelling against the French.
the French just never formally gave it up. They're just like, no, still ours. We'll be
Yeah,
back.
Yeah,
yeah,
you can hang on to it for a little
yeah,
bit, but we'll be back.
We're
yeah.
just hanging
The
about.
yeah. Fun thing, even though the Americans had taken up most of the fighting before these negotiations had ever took place, the French still kept military presence in Vietnam. They don't quit until 1974 with the fall of Dien Bien Phu, which was a French held garrison.
Oh my god.
But I tell you, the French were just like,
Oh my
that's
god,
ours.
it's that scene from Monty Python where the American soldiers are in Vietnam and they come across the garrison. It's like, who are you?
We are French. Can't you tell by our ridiculous accent? Well, what are you doing in Vietnam? Mind your own business.
I can smell your diabetes from here, you fat
Yeah,
Americans.
it's it's pretty bad. Yeah,
I fucked in your general direction.
yeah. Dien Bien Phu, technically a French defeat.
Yeah, we didn't
Yep.
serve the only ones.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Now, the provisional
We
revolutionary
don't care if
government-
we lose. We just don't want the French to win.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, precisely. And one of the big implications of these peace negotiations in Paris is who gets invited. And the PRG, the Provisional Revolutionary Government, the banner that the Viet Cong and the National Liberation Front all supposedly fly under as one big happy family, gets formal recognition by participating in these peace negotiations. They also gain acknowledgement that they are the rightful government over the territory of South Vietnam held by the Viet Cong, which is a big deal because the Viet Cong are effectively labeled as terrorists.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Congratulations, we no longer see you as terrorists.
Yeah.
You've been upgraded to legitimate government. Prepare for war.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the rest of us.
Yeah. And the peace negotiations also put forward that we are going to decide who should be the rightful ruler of South Vietnam via democratic election. Is it the South Vietnamese government? Is it this provisional revolutionary government? And both sides, everyone agrees to an armistice. An election will be held. The South Vietnamese and the Viet Cong both go home and immediately start attacking each other because both sides know that they are rigging whichever the election on whoever. So every village you hold is another vote for you.
They
This
really
is-
just said we'll do this, but they're totally going to cheat.
It's like
So we might as well cheat.
Oh my god! It's like
And we might as
Avatar:
well
The Last.
invade them to stop them from cheating.
It's like Avatar: The Last Airbender with the two warring tribes and trying to cross the canyon.
Oh,
And neither
yeah.
one's supposed to have food, but they both brought food because the other one was going to anyways.
Yeah, we knew they were gonna do it.
We're not gonna let those filthy ones have food and let ours go starving.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep, it's all that. All that insanity.
It's all assholes all the way down.
Yep.
It always has been.
North Vietnam sees this fight, sees the breaking of the armistice, and says, that is a wonderful excuse to just finally invade you and finish you off.
Finish it.
So they launch a full-scale assault at South Vietnam, and the South Vietnamese government will collapse in the spring of 1975. As a result of this, the PRG and the Vietcong are the sole remaining governmental force in South Vietnam.
So it's not that they lost, it's just that they're the sole survivors.
Yep. The PRG then formally unifies South Vietnam with North Vietnam, because that was kind of part of the plan all along. And with this merger, the Viet Cong effectively will cease to exist. The PRG becomes the National United Front. Power is then centralized in the North Vietnamese Communist Party. And seeing how the Viet Cong were effectively a militia force, they are either disband and go back to their old civilian lives, or they are incorporated into the North Vietnamese military.
Damn, even the Viet Cong can't avoid corporate mergers.
It's interesting because in America, a lot of times this is taught as like a not really a loss, but not really a win, just kind of a stalemate where the U.S. just finally said, okay, we've had enough, you two finished the fight, and then the South subsequently lost without being propped up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the whole peace with honor in Vietnam. Yeah, no. You abandon them to their fate.
To their death. And where it established future American policy, so this is a great point for me to take off here because I see we're at the end of our notes, but
go for it.
Where this actually really impacts American policy is this was actually referred to as the Nixon Doctrine, by the way. How we have the Monroe and the Marshall Doctrine. The Nixon Doctrine basically establishes that as the United States Armed Forces, one of the ways we should project our power and project our influence is by supporting and supplying military goods and weaponry to nations and training instead of soldiers. And we have done that ever since. That has almost been the United States' direct response with Israel, with Ukraine, with
Iraq, right?
Iraq as well, yeah. Before even the invasion of the United States, we tried propping up the Iraqi government, the Kuwaiti government, even Al-Qaeda when the Soviets were threatening Afghanistan. We gave good old money to Saddam Hussein, trained up all his soldiers.
Technically, what happened was we gave it to Pakistan so they could do it. Since technically the U.S. wasn't really doing it, we weren't giving it to them. We just gave it to Pakistan, and Pakistan was free to give it to whoever. And Pakistan, just was like, oh, we'll just give it to, the Mujahideen, the Al Qaeda, and then the Taliban. Like, if they just happen to do that, that's not our problem. That's not our fault.
Yeah, for those of you wondering why I was so hesitant to cover the topic of the Viet Cong here, it is precisely because of what we are doing right now. And that is how easily it devolves into modern politics.
But at the same token, and this is where we have a lot of debate and where you guys get to see behind the curtain a little bit as we're bickering here, but one of the things we establish for this channel is we consider it to be historic by the terms of the American National Historic Preservation Act, which dictates 50 years or older for historic properties and events. So that is how I managed to squeeze the Vietcong into this episode, is because 1974 was exactly 50 years ago.
And we get to just, break Column spirit. Just a
But
little
like
bit more.
topics like this, we don't talk about that often. And realistically, like I know us growing up, we imagine the World War II generation as being the old guard, but in reality, they've died off. The Korean War vets have died off. Now it's on Vietnam vets, which are like parents' age, a little bit older, or grandparents. Like they're the ones that went out there and fought, and it's like some of the stuff they had to go through and endure. Even John McCain, former senator, he spent weeks in a tiny bamboo cage because if you did survive the pitfall trap, congratulations, you became a captive of the Viet Cong, and they would torture you, and they had some fucked up ways of doing it. Pardon my French.
Yeah.
Like one of my
personal, not pardon the French.
Blame them.
No, but what they would do is you would be in these traps, and they would place bamboo underneath you, and the bamboo would grow at the rate of a foot a day. And it would pierce the skin and grow through you because nothing would stop it from growing.
Yeah.
That's
Very
why it's also, coincidentally, that's also why it's an extremely invasive species in the U.S.
Yeah, because it grows quite literally like a wild weed, but they would use that with the traps, and they would truly make it miserable. And that's also where a lot of these pitfall traps really became efficient, because you shave off a couple of ends of the bamboo, and congratulations, you got a bamboo pike that you can easily stab into the bottom of the ground. And the Viet Cong had the tunnel systems, and the United States tried to counteract that, and they tried to fight back on that, and they had a couple of interesting methods to attack in the tunnels. And you guys, can I get an answer from the audience here? How did the United States fight back with the tunnels?
Well, it's
Hans,
America.
get the flame throwing.
Yep. Yeah, it's fire. It's always fire.
Oh god, there's that really infamous photo that's supposedly from a war crime. It's a war crime. It is basically the eradication. It's supposedly supposed to be of an entire, as like a U.S. Marine eradicating an entire village with flamethrower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They very much employed the flamethrower, but even in the tunnels, they would flood the tunnels, so they would quite literally just drown the people in them. They would, you know, that war that they fought maybe 20 years prior to Vietnam. That
Against the Japanese.
Well, against the more European opponent.
Yes, the Italians.
Yeah.
Well,
The fez-wearing Italian man.
The Americans took inspiration, and they would empty gas canisters into the tunnels and effectively suffocate and they would gas.
That's a DIY gas chamber.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
they would just
it
hook
is.
up like tailpipes to the Jeeps to the ends of the tunnels and just rev them.
And this right here is why I exclusively focused on the Viet Cong, because otherwise we just become a absolute list of nightmares.
American war crimes. Tell me what your favorite one is.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of
We're supposed to have favorites.
Let's go back to talking about Nixon, guys.
Wait a minute, I thought that was a different episode.
But that is part of why public support really became an issue. And granted, a lot of influences within the U.S. were very anti-war, very anti-Vietnam, very much bring our children home. And I think the Vietnam Memorial, to wrap this all up and put a bow tie on it, if you ever get the chance, go visit the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's a very poignant memorial, and the way it is you can walk up on two sides of what is a right angle triangle, but as you walk, it slopes further and further down, and you see these black walls of marble, and in the marble, less than an inch big, are just the names of every American who lost their lives inscribed on the wall. And it's what, probably a couple 100 feet long in each side.
Yeah, it's very evocative. I've been in it. It's not a particularly short walk, especially as it very quickly just starts towering over your head.
Yeah, it's meant to overwhelm you. It's meant to be dark and brooding, but also a very poignant response. But you realize just the capital. You realize how many people were lost, and you start looking at the MIA or the wounded in action. Like, it's just it's awful. It was a very bloody, brutal time. Anyways, I think that's enough rambling. Thank you guys for listening. Let us know what you thought, and we'll see you in the next one.